trashed by more people or anything like that.
It's not trashed by more people. What you're saying is not correct. It's not trashed by more people.
I'm not saying it is.
At 62, a man like Quentin Tarantino doesn't speak from impulse. He speaks from a lifetime of bruised memories and sharpened convictions. And when he finally reflects on the people he could never work with again, it isn't anger that fills the room. It's the weight of everything unspoken. Born in 1963, Tarantino rose from video store clerk to one of cinema's most influential storytellers, shaping modern film with raw instinct, relentless discipline, and uncompromising vision. So when Tarantino revealed the 6 actors he truly came to resent, it wasn't gossip. It was a lifetime revealing its fractures. 1. Lawrence Tierney, the talent Tarantino couldn't tame. Quentin first encountered Lawrence Tierney the way many young filmmakers of the early 90s did, through the crackling glow of old noir films playing on late-night television. Tierney had that rare quality Tarantino cherished, a face that carried history and a presence that didn't need dialogue to command a room. Casting him in Reservoir Dogs felt like inviting a legend into a new era. A bridge between the grit of the past and the daring style Tarantino was shaping. For a young director making his first feature, it was almost a dream fulfilled. But dreams, as anyone who has lived long enough knows, don't always survive daylight. On set, Tarantino discovered a side of Tierney that rattled even his youthful confidence. The man who once brought quiet menace to the screen now brought volatility to the set. He forgot lines, argued over direction, and clashed with Tarantino in ways that turned each shooting day into a test of endurance. Yet, despite the frustration, Tarantino still carried a measure of respect for Tierney's earlier work. He admired the man he had once been, the actor who carved his place in Hollywood when studio lights were still blinding and unforgiving. The impact, however, was decisive. Tierney taught Tarantino an early and unforgettable lesson. Control is the director's backbone, and when that control broke, even the promise of iconic talent wasn't enough to bridge the rift. After Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino shut the door quietly but firmly. Tierney's chapter in his cinematic universe ended as abruptly as it began. For Tarantino, it was not hatred born overnight. It was the finality that comes when trust can no longer stand. 2. Bruce Willis, the star who never fit the rhythm. Bruce Willis entered Tarantino's orbit at a moment when both men needed something from each other. Willis, known for his swaggering confidence and effortless charm, had weathered a series of commercial disappointments. Tarantino, crafting Pulp Fiction, wanted actors who could shed their public personas and slip into his world of fractured dialogue, broken heroes, and redemption hidden beneath violence. Tarantino admired Willis long before they met. He respected the hard-edge vulnerability that made Die Hard an instant classic. And for a time, he believed Willis could bring that same rawness into Pulp Fiction. But admiration is not the same as alignment. On set, their rhythms clashed. Willis was a product of the studio system, used to improvising, used to leading, used to bending scenes with sheer star presence. Tarantino, on the other hand, sculpted dialogue with the precision of a novelist. He needed actors who treated each word like a musical note. For him, the script wasn't a suggestion, it was gospel. Behind closed doors, their creative friction grew. Tarantino respected Willis's legacy. Anyone who lived through the 80s and 90s knew the gravity of Bruce Willis's star power, but respect couldn't erase the feeling that Willis operated in a different cinematic language. Tarantino wanted actors who vanished into their roles. Willis remained unmistakably Willis. The impact lingered long after Pulp Fiction became a cultural milestone. While other actors from the film became recurring figures in Tarantino's career, Willis remained a single-entry name. A brilliant performance, yes, but a collaboration that would never be repeated. For Tarantino, it wasn't bitterness. It was the quiet recognition that even two giants of their fields can fail to share the same creative air. And once he felt that misalignment, Tarantino simply stepped away, leaving Willis as one of the rare stars he admired, but could never work with again. 3. George Clooney, the leading man who stood outside Tarantino's world. Quentin Tarantino first crossed paths with George Clooney during a moment when independent cinema was straining against the edges of old Hollywood. From Dusk Till Dawn was a strange, rebellious creation, half crime thriller, half supernatural descent. And Tarantino believed Clooney, rising from television fame into film stardom, could carry its unusual weight. For a time, their worlds aligned. Clooney admired Tarantino's boldness, the way he broke rules with a smile, and Quentin saw in Clooney a polished charisma that could anchor a chaotic story. But connections founded on convenience don't always survive time. As the years passed, Tarantino observed Clooney from afar, watching an actor who grew into one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Charming, articulate, beloved. Yet that very familiarity created distance. Tarantino respected actors who disappeared into the fabric of a role, who allowed themselves to be consumed by character rather than carried by fame. Clooney, despite his undeniable talent, brought a signature sheen to every scene he touched. To viewers, he was always George Clooney, the assured stride, the half smile, the star power that could brighten a film without ever blending into it. The turning point came not through a single conflict, but through Tarantino's blunt honesty. In interviews, he spoke critically of Clooney's work, questioning the depth of his performances and dismissing him as a movie star rather than an actor shaped by risk and grit. For older viewers who lived through Clooney's ascension, those words carried a sting, a reminder that Hollywood friendships are delicate, easily bruised by ego and expectation. Despite this, Tarantino harbored no malice toward Clooney's success. Instead, he saw him as someone walking a different cinematic path, smoother, cleaner, more aligned with traditional Hollywood than the blood and bone storytelling Tarantino embraced. The impact was lasting. Clooney became one of the few major figures from Tarantino's early circle who never resurfaced in his later work. It wasn't a feud, it was simply a quiet dissonance. The kind two artists feel when their visions drift too far apart. 4. Spike Lee, a clash of vision, voice, and identity. Some disagreements are born from personality, others from pride, but the rift between Spike Lee and Quentin Tarantino came from something deeper, an ideological collision between two filmmakers who shaped their art around truth, identity, and the wounds of history. Tarantino discovered Spike Lee long before their feud. He admired the audacity of Do the Right Thing, the way Lee captured communities with unflinching honesty, and the emotional force that gave his films their unmistakable heartbeat. Tarantino respected Lee as a peer, not in genre, but in the fearless pursuit of a voice. But admiration becomes fragile when two artists believe they have equal claim to a narrative. When Tarantino used racially charged language in Jackie Brown, and later Django Unchained, Spike Lee spoke out forcefully, accusing him of exploiting a history that wasn't his to dramatize. His words echoed the concerns of an audience deeply connected to America's past. For those who lived through the civil rights era, Lee's criticism felt less like rivalry and more like a call for responsibility. Tarantino, shaped by a different upbringing and equally bold convictions, pushed back with equal strength. He believed art required freedom, the freedom to offend, to challenge, to dissect painful histories rather than preserve them behind glass. His retort was sharp, perhaps too sharp, and it sealed the divide. It became clear these were two storytellers who could never share the same canvas. Their talents were immense, but their values collided like tectonic plates. The impact extended far beyond personal tension. Their disagreement became a defining debate within modern film. Who has the right to tell which stories, and where the line between homage and appropriation truly lies? Tarantino's dislike wasn't rooted in Spike Lee's filmmaking. If anything, he continued to respect the artistry. But the bitterness of their public clash left a scar time never softened. For both men, the hostility wasn't about ego, it was about principle. And principles once wounded can be harder to heal than pride. 5. Steve Buscemi, a friendship that faded into distance. There was a time when Steve Buscemi felt like one of Quentin Tarantino's natural companions, a wiry, sharp-eyed actor who moved through scenes with a jittery elegance. Tarantino first discovered him the way many independent filmmakers did, through those offbeat 80s performances where Buscemi took small roles and carved them into unforgettable shapes. Casting him as Mr. Pink in Reservoir Dogs wasn't just a decision, it was an affirmation. Tarantino saw in Buscemi a performer who understood the rhythm of dialogue the same way a seasoned blues guitarist understands the spaces between notes. For a moment, it seemed like the beginning of a long partnership. Buscemi delivered a performance that became etched into the memory of an entire generation, especially for those who remember the surge of independent cinema in the early 90s. Tarantino respected Buscemi's discipline, his willingness to sink into the details of a character, and his unpretentious approach to the craft. They shared laughter, long workdays, and the sense of being part of something bold and new. But the quiet fractures often come from the smallest things. There was no explosive argument, no dramatic walk-off. Instead, their connection simply began to cool. Industry whispers, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes not, spoke of personal disagreements, conflicting attitudes, and subtle moments where their views on professionalism diverged. Whether those stories were true or stretched by time hardly mattered. What mattered was that Tarantino felt a shift, one he couldn't ignore. And once he sensed misalignment, even with someone he admired, he tended to move on without looking back. The impact lingered gently, but unmistakably. Buscemi never appeared in another Tarantino film. He went on to build an extraordinary career, from Fargo to Boardwalk Empire. Yet his absence from Tarantino's later projects always left a faint question in the air. For older viewers who watched both men rise during the 90s renaissance of filmmaking, the silence between them feels as much a sign of life's drift as any disagreement. Some relationships end not in anger, but in a quiet acceptance that paths have diverged. 6. Warren Beatty. A battle of vision too large for one frame. Warren Beatty entered Tarantino's world like a figure from another era, a Hollywood titan, one of the last great matinee idols who carried both charisma and creative force. Tarantino admired Beatty long before they spoke. Anyone who grew up with Bonnie and Clyde or Reds understood the gravity Beatty brought to the screen. When Tarantino began shaping Kill Bill, he imagined Beatty as Bill, not just an antagonist, but a wounded poet of violence. In his mind, Beatty had the elegance, the mystery, and the mythic weight the role required. Their early conversations were respectful, even warm. Beatty saw Tarantino as a brilliant renegade breathing life back into cinema. Tarantino saw Beatty as a legend who could elevate his story into something timeless. But admiration doesn't always guarantee harmony. Beatty, a director in his own right, had strong ideas, and he voiced them with the confidence of a man who spent decades shaping Hollywood from the inside. Tarantino valued collaboration, but only within the boundaries of his vision. For him, a film was a symphony with one conductor, and he had no intention of sharing the baton. Their disagreements weren't loud, but they were absolute. Beatty wanted to mold the character. Tarantino needed someone willing to surrender to the role. In the end, the distance between their approaches became too wide to ignore. Beatty stepped aside, or perhaps Tarantino quietly guided him toward the exit. And David Carradine took the role that would define the film. The impact was unmistakable. Tarantino realized that even legends can cast shadows too large for his creative landscape. For those who remember Beatty's golden years, or Tarantino's rebellious rise in the 90s, the story feels almost inevitable. Two singular voices, each certain of his craft, unable to inhabit the same space without colliding. There was no lingering grudge, no public bitterness. Just two artists, each walking away to protect the clarity of his vision. When you look at these 6 names together, a pattern emerges, not of anger, but of a man fiercely protective of the craft he spent a lifetime learning to command. Tarantino's dislikes were rarely about talent. They were about energy, discipline, respect for the story, and the invisible chemistry that either strengthens a film or quietly destroys it. For viewers who remember the rise of independent cinema, the grainy film stock, the unpredictable creativity, the rebirth of character-driven storytelling, his choices speak less about conflict and more about conviction. The actors he walked away from reveal the boundaries that shaped him, and in those boundaries, you find the map of his artistic soul. At 62, Quentin Tarantino stands as one of the few directors whose voice has remained unmistakably his own. His reflections on the actors he could never work with again aren't confessions of bitterness. They are reminders that artistry demands honesty, sometimes harsh, sometimes painful, but always anchored in truth. For those who have watched his films across decades, you can feel the evolution in his voice, the clarity that only age and experience can shape. These 6 actors, each in their own way, challenge the delicate equilibrium he needs to create his stories. And in stepping away from them, he protected the vision that made him who he is. Because in the end, the art remains, long after the conflicts fade into memory. Tarantino's revelations mark the divide between old Hollywood collaboration and the modern auteur's resolve, a reminder that great films often rise from the courage to walk away. I didn't come this far to compromise what I know a movie can be.